PDP candidate Robbie Kwankunso appears today at the Chatham House. It says wrong leadership choices brought the nation to where it is today. Now, senior lawyer Mr. Olisa Agbakoba has written to INEC on what he termed the ambiguous aspect of the law on winning presidential election. We'll be hearing from him on those. And President Muhammad Buhari says his administration has spent over $1 billion on equipment needed to recover territories in the northeast region of the country taken by Boko Haram. Just as the FG today also revealed our plans to spend 2.2 billion naira for procurement of training aircraft. Hello everyone, welcome to the program. This is Politics Today live on Channels Television. I'm sure Kimaloe in Abuja. We continue to count down to the 25th of February election, which is now 37 days. Nigerians are now anticipating the opportunity to elect their leaders in February this year. So get your PVC, everyone, and make your vote count. It's your civic responsibility, and get doing it so that you can be proud of your actions. Tonight, there seems to be some legal clarity that needs to be made. And so when you see senior lawyers, especially a former president of the NBA, asking INEC to tell Nigerians what the section 133 and 134 of the Constitution says, and perhaps the interpretation of that law. I mean, is it coincidence also that when he said that, Mr. Wole Olanipekun, another senior advocate of Nigeria, he was in Ekiti earlier today, and he was saying there are some areas of the electoral law that needs to be fixed. How does a president emerge? Do you know? For those who are saying, oh, there might not be, election might not be concluded on the first ballot, do you know the criteria to which a president can emerge? Well, these are interesting conversation, because if you need to make those decisions, you have to understand the criteria for anyone to become president in Nigeria. So we get to all of that. Plus, we'll be talking about election security. President Buhari said his government has spent about over $1 billion on procuring military equipment to tame insurgents in the northeast region of the country. We'll be dissecting those issues and what this means also for the 2023 election. So much to talk about, everyone. Stick around with me. Let's first and foremost check out some of your political roundup stories.
The People's Democratic Party (PDP) presidential candidate Atiku Abubakar has assured Nigerians of steady growth of the economy through massive industrialization, restructuring of the country to reflect the wishes and aspirations of all Nigerians if elected as president come next month's presidential election. He made the promise in Abeokuta, the Ogun State capital, during his campaign tour of the state capital, where he was residents to vote for the PDP and all its candidates in the next general election. Justice Ahmed Ramat Mohammed of the Federal High Court, Abuja, has dismissed a suit seeking disqualification of the All Progressive Congress and Bola Tinubu over the nomination of Muslim candidacy for the 2023 presidential election. The suit, instituted by an Abuja-based legal practitioner, Mr. Osigwe Momo, was thrown out by the judge on the grounds of lack of local standi by the plaintiff. Justice Mohammed held that the lawyer, not being a member of the APC and having not participated in the process that produced Tinubu and his running mate Kashim Shettima, cannot query them on the nominations. Rivers State Governor Nyesom Wike has vowed never to refrain from his promise to announce his preferred presidential candidate as the misunderstanding in the opposition party persists. He says his pronouncement will be made very soon, as this year's presidential election will be predicated on integrity. Governor Wike was speaking at the state PDP campaign rally in Emoha local government area, where the governorship candidate, Similaye Fubara, promised full security, among others.
You are being patient will not be taken for granted. Do you understand me? Yes, sir. The bell will soon ring. The bell will soon ring.
The governor of Edo State, Mr. Gordon Obaseki, says the current economic policies of the federal government does not portend a bright future for Nigerian youths. According to him, Nigeria spends about $400 billion on importing goods and services that can be sourced within. He explained that the jobs available for the youths are mostly menial jobs, which does not encourage anyone to go and receive proper educational training without the hope of securing a decent job.
Somebody can go to Abuja and get a license to import at a subsidized exchange rate. Why will somebody spend 20 years investing in an oil palm plantation?
The People's Democratic Party in Abia State is calling on citizens of the state to vote for all candidates of the party in this year's election. Addressing party members in Umuahia while unveiling his manifesto, the PDP Central Senatorial candidate, Mr. Austin Akobundu, notes that the PDP remains the ruling party and will continue to provide the dividend of democracy to the citizens in the state. Governor Bala Mohammed of Bauchi State has promised to do more for the people of the Katagum region, especially in the areas of infrastructure development, if re-elected for a second tenure. He made the commitment when he took his campaign to Itas Godao, Shira and Jamare local government areas in the state. Following the recent Supreme Court judgment sacking the candidates for Imo West Senatorial District in the February election, Mr. Jones Onyeriri, he says that after wide consultations with his party and stakeholders, he has decided to seek judicial review of the judgment. He stated this at the Sam Mbakwe Airport in Owerri, the Imo State capital, while fielding questions from journalists shortly after arriving from Abuja, the nation's capital, to a rousing welcome by his supporters who trooped out in their numbers to welcome him back to the state.
Our lives were more important, or was a better consideration beyond every other reasoning. But in Supreme Court, they felt otherwise.
And in Delta State, the State PDP Campaign Council is asking the people of Delta to make good use of the opportunity of Governor Okowa's emergence as a vice presidential candidate of the party to vote massively for the party at the 2023 general elections. Addressing a press briefing at the State Party Campaign Office in Asaba, the Delta State capital, Director General of the State Party Council, Funke Keme, expressed determination that the party is working hard to ensure that every vote counts for the PDP.
We call on Deltans beyond party lines to take advantage of that and not let this opportunity slip by.
There you have it. You've been served. You have an idea of what has been happening all day as far as politics is concerned in Nigeria. So let's get down to it. Well, for the past few days, attention is being on the Nigerian election globally. The Chatham House is being receiving guests from Nigeria. Today, it was a turn of the NNPP presidential candidate, Rabiu Musa Kwankwaso, a former governor of Kano State, who took to the podium to speak on the topic, Nigeria 2023 elections, service delivery and policy alternatives. Mr. Kwankwaso said Nigeria's current realities are the culmination of over 2 decades of leadership mistakes and wrong choices. He said there are concerns about the choice Nigerians will make in February 25th, and is asking them to make the right choices. But then there are concerns about the electoral law, the constitution, and the 2023 election. A former NBA president and senior advocate of Nigeria, Mr. Olisa Agbakoba, has written to the chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, seeking clarifications for the requirements for winning the presidential election. Mr. Agbakoba, in his letter to INEC Chairman Professor Mahmoud Yakubu, is seeking to clarify the Commission's position on Section 134 of the 1999 Constitution to the public. The former chairman of the president of the Nigerian Bar Association, in a letter dated January 17, 2002, an address to the INEC chairman, said that his request for clarification on the provision of this section was premised on the seemingly ambiguous nature of the section, even as it concerns the electoral process. Well, let's break it down and let's hear from the horse's mouth. Mr. Olisa Agbakoba joins us live virtually from Lagos. Thank you so much, Leonard Sik, for joining us tonight, and it's good to see you. I guess Happy New Year will be in order, although it's 18 days into the new year, but yeah. I've not seen you this year. let's begin. I thought that it's pretty clear. And jokingly, I was having a conversation, and the scenario which played out after the 1979 election, where there was going to be a political mathematics to determine who the president was then, became a very major one for not only our jurisprudence, our electoral process, but also for Nigeria's politics. But Mr. Agbakuba, I thought this was pretty clear on how a president should emerge. But for you, a senior lawyer, to be writing to INEC for clarification, then something must be wrong.
Well, Happy New Year to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, something may or may not be wrong, but just as you said, in 1979, we all thought that it was clear what 2/3 meant. Now, it wasn't clear in the end. So I got a call, interestingly, from a close friend, client, and the question was, actually, I had no idea about this issue. And the question was posed as to, what exactly does Section 134 mean? And I looked at it, and I thought it had a couple of interpretations. On the one hand, it seems quite simple to say Section 134 requires a presidential candidate to win a quarter of the votes in 2/3 of all the states, which would be 24 out of 36. The problem is, what do we do with the Federal Capital Territory of Abuja? So in law, we have an interpretation process, which means you can interpret Section 134 conjunctively, which means you include the Federal Capital Territory in the 24 states. So if you won 24 states without winning Federal Capital Territory, you are through. The other interpretation is disjunctive, which means that in addition to winning 24 states, you need to win Abuja. Which means actually, if you count Abuja as a state, quote unquote, you needed to do 25. So which is correct, 24 or 25? That's the issue. And I can tell you on good authority, now I've researched and discovered that a couple of presidential candidates who became president did not actually win Abuja. So the question is, what do you do with their presidency? Is it valid or invalid? So I just thought to myself, why don't I just ask the INEC chair, because I think he's doing a fantastic job. I watched him at Chatham House. He's done everything. But this little banana peel might just slip everybody. So it would be good to clarify to everybody, to say, this is the rule. If you do win 2/3 of the states, you need to also win Abuja. Or if you win 2/3 of the states, Abuja is irrelevant. Then I have another hypothesis, which is if you won 36 states, but you didn't win Abuja. In other words, if you got a quarter of the votes in 36 states, but you don't win Abuja, are you validly elected? This is the controversy. So rather than avoid the problem of 1979, I thought it necessary to take this, my friend's, request, and say I put it to the election managing body to say, can you clarify? So let's know what the rules are before the game starts. And as you say, it's 37 days away. So that was the reason I did this.
Fantastic. So let's do a bit of mathematics here, Lionel Sake.
I'm not good at mathematics, so let me warn you.
I'm very terrible with mathematics, and if my secondary school mathematics teacher is watching now, he'll be so disappointed. But apologies. Well, it's just what it is. I'm not very fantastic with it. But it's basic, isn't it? 24 states is the 2/3 of 36, isn't it? So, for those who are wondering what this means, it is not so simple to be a president of Nigeria. So, yes, President Buhari won Atiku Abubakar with over 2 million votes the last time. That's the margin between the two men. Now, that alone could not have made him the president of Nigeria. He would have won in at least in 24 states, he would have won 25% in those 24 states. Now, Lionel Sake, give us an understanding in view of what the law says. And I'm very certain that the Electoral Act is not in contravention or is not antithetical to what the Constitution of the Federal Republic says. So they are in alignment. But now, for those who are saying we might not have a conclusion on the first ballot, seeing the kind of candidates we've seen for a long time, at least from 1998 up until now, this is perhaps the first time we have more than 2 Aussies in the race. We are having at least 3 or 4 now, which means that there is going to be a level of technicalities that might be ready. But INEC says it is ready for that challenge of a second ballot. Now, beyond what you explained earlier, are there all the areas of this section, 33, 133, and 134, that we also need to, INEC need to be critically looking at?
Well, there are 2 sets of electoral processes. The first is if there are 2 candidates, then those 2 candidates, the person who scores the highest with a spread wins. And as you rightly observed, this is the toughest election that we're going into. Very uncertain. We have, for the first time, a very serious third force. So when you look at the permutations, you might then say, what if nobody takes the thing on the first shot? So INEC will now have to consider a second ballot. And I'm happy that the chairman of INEC has said that INEC is more than ready to do that. Now, the qualification for this second ballot is different. You just have to win on a simple majority. So if the second ballot takes place, and me, Olisa, I'm running against you, Shegun, and I have 10, you have 8, I win. So that's the difference. But the first one is more difficult. The first one is targeted at making sure the person who is president of Nigeria is enjoying a majority of the support of the diversity of Nigeria. If you looked at the list that INEC released concerning the voting numbers, I mean, I could actually look at taking Lagos and the Northwest and a couple of other states, and I can win. But the Constitution says no. We don't want a president who, even though he has a majority from 3 or 4 states, we won't declare him president because he doesn't represent Nigeria. So that's the difference between the first set of criteria and the second. So the first one speaks about spread. The second runoff speaks about simple majority or numbers. So that's the difference.
So, I mean, invariably, it is the section 134 subsection 1B that talks about, it says, and I quote here, that after the premise is on winning the simple majority. Now it now says he has not less than 1/4 of the votes cast at the election in each of at least 2/3 of all the states in the federation and the Federal Capital Territory. Does this imply that instead of doing the mathematics of 36, we should actually be doing 37? Because it says end. That means that the state end the FCT.
That's what the purpose of my letter is. So I want to know, if I win, if I was running and I won 1/4 of the votes in 36, not even 24, in all 36 states, but I failed to win 1/4 of the votes in the FCT, would I be declared president? I've taken 36 states, or in fact, 36 states, I take 100% of the votes. So that's more than 1/4. But I do not make 1/4 in Abuja. Would I be declared president? My view is no. But because of the confusion and the way that the 19 to 13 came up, nobody ever gave a thought that Kano State could be divided. Because a human being, a state is like a being. You can't split it. But the Supreme Court split Kano State. So I rather would like to promote the view that INEC must be prepared for all eventualities. I mean, Mr. the chairman of INEC's performance at Chatham House was perfect, but there might just be a banana peel. So the way I see it, INEC is more than prepared and ready to present to us free, fair, credible, verifiable, and transparent elections. But could Mr. Chairman of INEC just quietly look at this so that they mightn't be caught unawares? So it might look like a simple issue.
Yeah, it does look like a simple issue, but looking at it critically now, you've been looking into the technicalities of the law for so many years. So for you to have seen this means that there's something that we need to be careful about. Now,
I think so.
In this kind of situation, let us say, INEC also might have some kind of dilemma, which they might not be a puzzle, which readily they may not be able to resolve because there is an obvious ambiguity in this section. Now, what does the law say about this kind of scenario? I thought that the Supreme Court is given the powers to review or to give us a direction when we find this kind of confusion. Is it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't know whether they would want to do it, honestly. I don't. It's a difficult dilemma about how do you resolve all this. But my point is simply that let's clear all the ambiguity. So one way that it can be done is for INEC to approach the courts to say, well, no, before that, INEC can say, well, actually, Mr. Bakaba, you are not really right. We're used to this. The interpretation of Section 134 is very clear. So don't worry, we understand it. They could say that. That could be the reply that the chair of INEC would say. What you say, we take it, we understand it. But it's not really a problem because we have had many elections and this is our standard. So our standard is as follows. So my letter would just be a smoke screen and they will dismiss it. But they could say, well, look, you have a point here. So what do we do? Do we wait for a problem to arise or do we preempt the problem by going to court? Now, unfortunately, INEC cannot approach the Supreme Court directly. Now, would it be that the Attorney General of the Federation approaches the court? And in that case, he has the possibility of going to the Supreme Court. So there are all kinds of, possibilities. But to be honest with you, I don't have the answer. That's the honest truth. My real concern was to present something I saw as a challenge that came from a friend, and I looked at it very closely. Okay, I'll just give you an example. Section 134(1) says if there are only two candidates, then the person who has the majority will be declared winner. Then the other section, Section 134(2) says where there are more than two candidates, then the person who scores the highest. So I wonder, why the difference? Why is one saying majority, the other one is saying highest in the same electoral process? Is that not some sort of ambiguity? So there's a lot in the pot for INEC to really resolve. What I think that INEC can do, my own opinion, is to issue a clarification, given their own experience, because I'm sure this is not something that will be new to them. To say, yes, we've seen this letter, but this is what we have done practically. So you need, for instance, to win a quarter of the votes in 2/3 plus Abuja. Or on the principle of incorporation, if you win 24 states, but don't win Abuja, then you also can be declared president. So all INEC has to do is to declare what Section 134 really means.
It's a legal conundrum, which
not easy.
Not an easy one, trust me. But in all of this, I guess why this is coming up is because for the first time in a long time, perhaps since 1979, we've not come to a point where we are thinking, even at this point, a lot of political analysts said it is not clear who is going to win the election, despite all of the polls that have gone round and all of that, and what political parties and their candidates are saying. But just a moment, I want you to also listen to what Mr. Wole Olanipekun said. He called on the National Assembly to consider changing the section 65 of the electoral act. Let me allow you to listen to him, and I'll get your own view on what the learners said.
As a lawyer, which I can also say publicly, and which I've also, explained and whispered to people privately, is about Section 65 of the Electoral Act. To me, it's a very, very, very dangerous constitution. I mean, section so novel in the sense that here you have a section which empowers a returning officer after returning to review his decision within a period of 7 days. The returning officer is not a court of law. The returning officer is not a tribunal. The returning officer is not vested with jurisdiction to exercise judicial or quasi-judicial decision or to assume jurisdiction over any matter that is judicial in nature. When election is conducted, a returning officer returns or makes a return immediately thereafter, depending on the number of days. Any aggrieved party goes to court, not to go back to the returning officer that has made a return.
All right. That's Mr. Wole Olanipekun. Let us see, what is your view on yet another controversial part of it? This is an introduction that we just got from the amendment of the electoral law.
This is a field of administrative law that is very, very technical. And being a disciple of Professor Alexander, who was perhaps the greatest person in this field, there are two possible views to take. And I will support my learned brother when he says, I think the underlying point that Wole is making is the danger of handing over quasi-judicial powers to, I'm sorry to say, suspect INEC officials. Because a court of law has a defined process of dealing with issues. I'm not so sure that I can say so with the greatest possible respect to INEC officials. So in exercising quasi-judicial powers, because if you deliver a decision, once delivered under administrative law, it's final. It can only be reviewable by a court. But in advanced countries, administrative officers can exercise quasi-judicial powers. So it is possible to review a decision you've taken. To give that sort of power to INEC officials in the context of the difficulties and challenges we've had with INEC might pose a problem. So Wole's point is really, it's better to go to the judicial process that has a clearly defined way of dealing with reviews. So if you give the power to an INEC officer, having declared a result, to review it, he could do anything. That's the danger.
All right.
Could do anything.
Mr. Gbakoba, before you go, just in few seconds, Nigerians are presented with very tough choices in this election, especially at the presidential level. If you're speaking with millions of them tonight via this platform, what can you tell them tonight that might help them to make that decision for a greater Nigeria?
Yeah, you should look for a president who is giving you, first of all, hope, who promises that he will unite the country that has been quite disunited, who promises to pick up on the economy, which is a big issue, who also is very clear about the nature of the insecurity we suffer, who will deal with unemployment. These are what I call the big issues. A president who will give you hope, who will turn around the problems Nigeria faces. Unemployment, the youth are, on the streets, no jobs, no hope. That is the sort of person that I would hope, people would vote for.
Well, thank you so much for that insight tonight, Mr. Olisa Agbakuba, a former president of the Nigerian Bar Association and senior advocate of Nigeria. I guess this is a lot for not only lawyers and INEC to ponder on, but also for Nigerians also to think about. Is there a need for, especially the National Assembly, to think out with this part of the law so we don't find ourselves in a very troubled water ahead of the election? Thank you so much indeed for your time tonight.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We take a break. When President Muhammadu Buhari says he spent over $1 billion on procuring equipment to tame insurgency in the Northeast, and we assess that decision plus the 2.2 billion naira that is supposed to be spent by the federal government on training aircraft. We'll also add the conversation on securing this election and how to police it better. The 2023 election security, I have very distinguished two experts, security experts that will be joining me on that conversation. Plus, we will also be hearing from Conference from Chatham House. Stay with us, everyone. We'll be right back. Thanks everyone for staying with us. We reported to you earlier that the NNPP presidential candidate Robbie Ponkunso made an appearance at the Chatham House in London. Let me allow you to listen to some parts of his presentation today.
We shall lift Nigerians from the poverty ditch through targeted poverty alleviation and poverty elimination strategies that ensure families at the bottom of the social ladder have access to food, clothing, quality education, basic health care, and basic housing needs. B, to ensure that those lifted out of the poverty do not return into the poverty bracket, we shall ensure that beneficiaries of our poverty elimination programs maintain good paying vocation, high yielding investment, as well as strategic savings to ensure individual, family, and community prosperity.
That's Robbie Ponkunso, NNPC presidential candidate. Let's get to our second conversation tonight. President Muhammadu Buhari in Mauritania today says his administration spent over $1 billion on equipment needed to recover territories in the northeast region of the country taken by Boko Haram. According to a statement released by Special Advisor on Media and Publicity, Femi Adesina, the president also noted that Nigeria continues to engage bilaterally and multilaterally to comprehensively win the war against the insurgency and other related terror groups through kinetic and non-kinetic approaches. The president said, and I quote, "When I assumed power in 2015, Boko Haram held about 2/3 of Borno State, half of Yobe State, and a couple of local government areas in Adamawa State, all in the northeast of Nigeria." The president said that he's making effort in ensuring that he leaves a legacy in fighting insecurity in Nigeria. And that was part of his address at the African Conference for Peace 2023 in Mauritania. He went further to say, "We have been able to retrieve these swaths of territories by investing over $1 billion to acquire hard and software weaponry from the US and other friendly countries to carry out sustained operations against insurgency since 2015. It's also today that the Federal Executive Council approved 2.29 billion naira for the procurement, assemblage of training aircraft and simulator in Zaria. The Minister of Aviation, Hadi Sirika, said this today after the Federal Executive Council meeting chaired by the Vice President, Professor Yemi Oshibajo.
Federal Executive Council has today graciously approved the draft bill for an act to establish Nigeria Police Force College, training school and institution to serve as centers for professional training of officers of the Nigerian Police Force and other related matters.
That's the Minister of Police Affairs. But also we can tell you that the federal government said that the Inspector General of Police, Usman Baba, will not be retiring, despite some of the criteria which point in that direction. because they say he cannot be doing that in the middle of election. So there is an extended tenure for the IGP. Let's discuss all of these issues, everyone. I'm being joined by a very senior retired military officer, Group Captain Sadiq Shehu. Thank you so much indeed for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much, Shehu.
And we have joining us virtually from London, Mr. Bulama Bukati, who is an extremist policy expert with the Tony Blair Institute in London. Thank you so much, Mr. Bukati, for joining us. Let's begin the conversation with the group captain here. Give me an understanding, the number of, the amount of money spent under this government, which the president said. Can we equate the successes that we've seen so far with the amount of money spent?
Well, thank you very much. Now, in analyzing the success or otherwise of any military or security operation, there are certain indices which you look at. Where the government where the government met the previous government and where it is now. And these indices, which some Mr. President has touched on, include the amount of ground held either by armed forces or the non-state actors, Boko Haram in this case. Depending on different sources, because in doing my research, I look at different sources. I don't only look at government or federal sources. You will hear some people say 5 local governments were in the hands of Boko Haram as of the time when Buhari came. In other instances, you will hear 12. Now, whether it is 5 or 12, in between, we can say lies the actual number. But we can know as of now, from credible sources, that we have, debatedly 1 or 2 local governments. So you see, definitely now, if we are looking at ground held, either by our own forces, there we can see there's an increase. Another index that you can look at is the number of military personnel that you lost during the operation. Again, from all indices that I checked, it showed that the number of military men we lost in the insurgency fight has also gone down. So also there's an, an improvement in that. Another thing you have to look at, because security is for the civilian populace. How many of the civilians are killed? Again, the numbers since President Buhari came, except some spike ending of 2017, 2018, the numbers were going down steadily. And then now, again, another factor you have to look at, how many attacks by non-state actors have been able to launch. The truth is that, again, we have seen these numbers going down. So if you are looking in terms of, whether successes have been achieved, as far as the North is concerned, there's incontrovertible evidence that, yes, there are successes. Now, when you say, the success gain, is it equal to the amount of money spent? Well, in something like gaining the control of a territory, when we look historically, there is really no amount of money you can give that you can put on a piece of territory that belongs to a state. Countries can go to war for even half a square kilometer of their territory. We have seen that happening. However, when you say again whether Nigeria is spending enough or not, again, economic giant houses like the World Bank, like the IMF, they give guidance to countries as how much they could spend on a defense in any given year. Of course, they take into consideration that a country at peace will relatively spend lower money than a country that is at war. When a country is at peace, generally, experts agree that we should see the country spending between 0.3% to 5% of its GDP. That is during peacetime. What is the idea behind that? You should keep your military machine very sharp, because you never know when
trouble can come.
When trouble can come, and that is the problem we're having. This war met us at a time when our military equipment was very rusty, in terms of equipment, in terms of men, in terms of communication, in terms of mobility. So we are fighting the war at the same time retrofitting our military, which is very difficult. Now, when a country is at war, they could spend as much as, in fact, we have countries, when UK was during the World War, it was spending up to 50%. Now, when I say this percentage, I'm talking of GDP. In analyzing whether a country has spent enough, you use the GDP. You don't look at the figures in Naira or a percentage of the budget, because now when we look at the defense budget, for 2023, we hear that 13.4% of the budget goes to security and military.
All right. So I'll be asking a few more questions because we're now more concerned with the immediate need, the election that we have on our hand. I'm coming just for a moment because you fought on the ground. But let me get the view of Mr. Bukati, who is joining us virtually from London. Give me an understanding how prepared we are as a country in terms of our last line of defense, which is the military. This money that the president said we've spent. Now we have the challenge that Nigeria has before President Buhari got into office was mainly in the northeastern region of the country. The northwest is now there. The southeast is now also joined to it because of some of these unrest that we are seeing. But what would you say, or what can you tell us in terms of preparedness of a nation that is in the middle of all of these insecurity? It seems we've lost connection with it. But let me ask you that question. Okay. I mean, so we've procured this equipment, but where does it leave us? Does it leave us more prepared to be able to challenge any kind of enemy or affront that comes against our country?
If you ask my frank opinion is that it is work in progress. Even the government that is coming will have to do more. Now, when you look at historical...
Sorry, I think Mr. Bukati is back. Okay. Mr. Bukati, did you get my question earlier?
Sorry, what was that?
No, I was asking, based on the analysis Group Captain Shehu gave us earlier, and the monies that have been spent under the Buhari government, I'm asking, against any aggression against this country, because you cannot predict, you need to always be prepared. How prepared is Nigeria with all of this procurement, this military hardware that this government has spent $1 billion since gotten into office?
Yeah, I mean, the president said he spent $1 billion in trying to reclaim Nigeria's territory from Boko Haram. And that's a substantial amount of money, but we do know that security does consume a lot of money. I wondered, however, Shewin, when I had the number, whether this number includes the billions of Naira Babagana Monguno claim have gone missing under Buhari's administration. And when you look at the situation on the ground, you may be tempted to think not all of this money went into what the president is saying they have gone into, because we do know that our military, our heroes on the ground are lacking in basic military equipment. They have been complaining on how they are not provided with the basic materials they need to fight this war, but also how their welfare and salaries are not coming to them as at when due. And when you consider what the president said, the president was right. Some local governments in Borno and Yobe and Adamawa were under Boko Haram. But what he said in his statement was an exaggeration. He said 2/3 of Borno state was under Boko Haram. That wasn't correct. Nine local governments were inaccessible, and some of them were under Boko Haram, but there are 27 local governments in Borno, and 9 is not the 2/3 of 27. He said half of Yobe state was under Boko Haram. That wasn't correct. There were only 2 local governments under Boko Haram, and there are 17 local governments in Yobe state. But that does not mean the president did not do well in reclaiming some of the territory. And I say some, Shewin, because some of Nigeria's territory is still under Boko Haram. There are still at least 2 local governments where even the local government chairman and the emirs and the traditional rulers in charge of the local governments cannot access. Now, we know that Buhari did try in fighting Boko Haram, but we also know that hundreds of villages are now under bandits in the northwest and north central Nigeria. And we know that some of these communities will be inaccessible for election. And I think it is good for Buhari to reflect on those local governments that fell into the hands of terrorists and criminal gangs under him, when he is reflecting on the ones he reclaimed from terrorists.
So, I mean, it then brings me to one point, like I said earlier. So we heard another 2.2 billion will be spent on procurement of training aircraft. That's what the Minister of Aviation said. Now, in that, let's put that on our left hand. Now, election is an immediate need. So if you have said that we still have some territories of Nigeria under the control of this insurgent, and Mr. Bukati has also corroborated that fact, where do we go from here? Now, if we were that election is just 37 days away.
Well, you see, the issue is that election is seen also as part of seeking for good governance. So global best practice is to see that whenever elections are due, as much as possible, those elections are held. In most countries, in many countries, elections have held when there is insecurity. There's no gainsaying the fact that there is lack of security in some areas. But the issue, like I said, on global practice is to still forge ahead while taking, preventive measures, but still go ahead and hold the elections. That is what will show resilience of the country and resilience of our democracy. Now, again, in my opinion, the problem we're having with election security is that ab initio, I think in planning for security, we were only looking at security on the day of the voting, that somebody will come and scatter people, somebody will call and carry ballot box and the rest and so forth. When you look at the problems we're having now, the problems can be divided into three. Pre-elections, security challenges, which definitely, is going to be attack on INEC staff and INEC facilities. And then during the election, you also have another set of different problems. And then after the election, maybe if there's a disputed result, you have another set of election. But I think ab initio, our emphasis was on security during the election. So that's why this attack on this, INEC facilities caught us this. And again, I would like to know, again, in seeking solutions, when you're talking of election security, the solutions that you need lie in procedural security, in physical security. How do you design your polling stations? How do you put INEC offices? As opposed to, again, there should be less emphasis on actual, kinetic operations as a solution to security operation,
right.
to election security.
So if you look at the group captain, and I'll come to you now, Mr. Bukati, and I'd like to ask you a very straight question. There's no security excuse that can stop us from holding the election in the next 7 days.
There is no excuse whatsoever. However, complacency should be avoided. The security agency should come, but I have to be honest with you, I, as a citizen, I was not happy when I heard some noises from the INEC or from INEC officials as if they are going to postpone the election. That will not be a good thing. We should forge ahead.
Mr. Bukati, there was a time when a former NSA said in the Chatham House that election may not hold because of some of the insurgents holding on to some territory. So election had to be postponed. When he came back to the country, 6 weeks for election was postponed for 6 weeks. Now, it does look to me that when you and group captain said here, there see some territories being held by Boko Haram. And these elements, they're fighting, they're anti-democratic structure elements. Now, can we flush them out before this election? What are your general view about election security, just like Group Captain mentioned?
No, Sheun, I completely agree with Group Captain that there is no basis for these elections to not go ahead. Election is sacrosanct to democracy, and we are in a democratic system of governance in Nigeria, and nobody should use insecurity to excuse himself or to elongate his term in office. Thankfully, after those reports were circulated, the federal government was very firm and clear that elections must go ahead. But one thing we have also to keep in mind is we don't want to have any kind of election. What you want to have is an election that has legitimacy, credibility, integrity, and is as peaceful as possible. And as we speak today, there are substantial areas in Nigeria where election cannot go ahead unless the security situation is tackled or unless INEC becomes innovative. And I would give you examples. Like I said, there are literally hundreds of communities in Zamfara that will not be accessible to INEC officials, and therefore you cannot deploy election officials and materials there. Hundreds of villages in Katsina, hundreds in Sokoto, hundreds in other places, including some parts of Kaduna, where you cannot hold elections because you cannot deploy election officials there. But even aside of that, you have an estimated over 3 million internally displaced people. And the figure is substantial because the 2015 election was won by 2.5 million votes, just above 2.5 million votes. The last election was won by 4 million votes. And now you have over 3 million internally displaced people. Not all of them are up to the age of election. Maybe say 2 million of them should be able to vote. But by INEC's current arrangement, internally displaced people who are not in IDP camps are unable to vote on election days. And remember that all the IDPs in Zamfara, in the northwestern Nigeria, over 1 million of them, all of them are outside IDP camps because there are no IDP camps in the northwest. They are what we call community-based, internally displaced people. And by INEC's arrangement, these millions of Nigerians will not be able to vote, and we should not disenfranchise any Nigerian because of security concerns.
Well, deep thoughts there. Mr. Bulama Bukati, thank you so much. Group Captain, I really appreciate your thoughts tonight. We will, ahead of the election, we'll have an expanded conversation around election security. This is a very important conversation. Thanks so much indeed for your time. That's our show for tonight, everyone. Many thanks for watching. I'm sure Akimale. Bye-bye.